Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Dawn crept over Colorado like a slow breath, pale light sliding across the runways at Denver International. Maddie adjusted the strap of her aid bag and kept moving, boots ticking a steady rhythm on the tarmac. The air had that cold, metallic bite before sunrise, the kind that sharpened the mind and dried the throat. She did a mental inventory out of habit: tourniquets, chest seals, gauze, morphine, spare batteries, then checked it again. No excuses later. Not when lives could turn on a forgotten roll of tape. They loaded by numbers into the C-130, a gray cavern that smelled of hydraulic fluid and canvas. John Mercer gave a short nod as she passed. He didn't need to speak, his eyes had the same message they always carried before a mission: know your job, trust the plan, move when it's time. Ryan sat opposite, headset crooked around his neck, flipping a small notepad with grid coordinates and timing marks. No one wasted words. Words were for after. Engines wound up. Vibrations climbed the fuselage and settled into bones. Through the porthole, Denver shrank to a grid of sodium lights and black roads, then to a memory. Maddie let the drone of the turboprops wash the clutter from her head. In the hum there was order. In the checklist there was comfort. A picture flashed, Chris grinning with dust on his face, the way he used to after field exercises: pain just means you're not done yet. She blinked it away and focused on the present. Afghanistan waited with its quiet edges and sudden teeth. Briefing came in segments, first at altitude, then again on the ground at Colorado Springs Airfield before the hop out. The route slid across the screen: a narrow valley, a convoy trail, a fallback point marked by an old canal bridge. Extraction window thin as a razor. Radios cross-checked 3 times. If the net went dark, they'd move by the book and by the clock. Vaughn's note was clipped but clear: high-value target rumored to pass through Aranda's sector, patterns inconsistent, locals quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Maddie filed each line where it belonged. Terrain: broken, mineral gray, shedding gravel underfoot. Weather: dry, afternoon winds, visibility good until smoke. Threat: RPGs, PKMs from high rocks, maybe pressure plates, maybe nothing. Friendly, lean team, heavier on experience than on numbers. Medical: 2 litter kits, 1 on the lead, 1 on her. If things went bad, they would go bad fast, and whoever was still standing would have to make up the distance on will. They ferried east, then farther. The world traded green for tan, cities for emptiness, noise for wind. By the time the last hop carried them over the jagged ridges, Maddie's body had reset to the mission clock. Food was a bar she didn't taste. Water was timed sips. Sleep was a rumor. They stepped into Afghanistan under a sky so wide it made people feel small. The forward strip was a sliver of flat ground clawed out of rock, guarded by concrete and habit. Helicopters ghosted in, ghosted out. Inside a canvas tent, a map lay pinned by knives at the corners. Ryan traced the ingress with a gloved finger while Mercer watched the door as if the desert might walk through it. Maddie listened to the air: no birds, no vendor chatter, no goat bells, none of the small sounds that usually cut across mornings here. Quiet like that had weight. Weapons checks came like prayers: click, rack, settle. She ran a hand across the trauma shears on her vest, felt the smooth plastic of a tourniquet windlass, the sharp edge of taped down 4 catheters. She pictured the bridge again: rusted rails, cracked slabs, a faded spray of paint on concrete. A promise point. If the plan frayed, the bridge would be the knot. Vaughn appeared just long enough to hand Mercer a final confirmation. Light footprint. No heroics, he said. It wasn't a warning so much as a reminder. Heroics were what people wrote when they didn't understand the math of survival. They moved before sunrise. Boots scuffed dust into small ghosts that drifted and vanished. The valley welcomed them with long shadows that hid more than they revealed. Maddie walked rear security, head on a swivel, counting ridgelines, measuring wind, cataloging angles that felt wrong. The radio net hissed, cleared, hissed again. Far off, a donkey brayed and then fell silent. She didn't like that. Animals were honest sensors. The trail narrowed to a ledge. Rock rose on their left, dropped on their right. Gravel slid under each step with a hush like paper tearing. Mercer lifted a fist, the line froze. Maddie's breath slowed on command. The sun was a thin blade over the peaks, cutting gold into the gray. Somewhere, metal knocked metal, 2 quick taps, then nothing. Ryan's gaze flicked to her, then back to the ridge. She could feel the team holding the air in their lungs, waiting for it to tell them something. It told them nothing. They rolled again, measured, patient. 10 more minutes to the choke, 25 to the turn, 90 to the bridge if the clock loved them. Maddie recited the numbers without sound. She tasted dust, felt sweat start under the plate carrier, noted the stickiness across her shoulders where the pack straps rode. Her mind built lists inside lists, calm under layers of caution. This was the part before. The taut wire. The breath on the edge of a word. She had learned to live there, not fearing what came next, not pretending it wouldn't come. You don't bargain with the ground. You step on it. You listen. You move. At the bend, Mercer looked back once. It wasn't a question. It was a seal on the plan, a small, human yes. Maddie gave the same nod, almost nothing, but enough. The mission slipped forward another inch. The sun pushed higher. The valley thinned. Somewhere ahead lay a bridge, a fallback, an exit written in painted concrete. Somewhere between here and there, the desert would test what each of them carried: gear, skill, resolve, and the quiet, stubborn promise not to leave anyone behind was tested in the next breath. The valley snapped awake with a flat, brutal crack. Dust leapt from the rock walls as rounds stitched the trail. The lead vehicle took a hard hit from the left, pressure blast, heat, then the greasy roar of fuel catching. Mercer's fist dropped, his rifle came up, and the line broke to cover. Maddie dove toward a jagged outcrop, a bag slamming her spine, ears ringing with that high, electric whine that means you're alive and too close. The air turned into splinters. Chips of stone peppered her cheek. She tasted grit and metal. Ryan's voice tried to cut the radio hiss, short bursts, bearing calls, a smoke request that died in static. The ambush had depth. Fire from both sides, higher angle, disciplined rhythm. Not panic. Planned. Pain found her like a thrown hammer, left thigh, hot and wet, a sting at the shoulder that staggered her, a blunt punch to the ribs where the plate caught most but not all. She checked herself by instinct, air moving, bleeding heavy in the leg but bright arterial was spared. She cinched a tourniquet high and cranked until the world narrowed to teeth. Breath in. Sight lines. Return fire wasn't her job unless she had to, but she put 2 controlled shots into a muzzle flash upslope to buy a pocket of time for someone else. Push right, ledge, go. Mercer's bark cut through the noise. She looked for him and saw the shape that snapped the clock in half. He was down in the open, armor twisted, a dark pool spreading fast from his lower back. No cover within reach. Rounds licked the dirt around him. The team was pinned, angles were bad. If he stayed there 30 more seconds, he'd be a body bag. Maddie moved before she had the thought. A sprint angled across fire, boots skidding on hungry gravel. A round flicked her helmet, another slapped her side and stole her breath. She hit on a knee, kept going, grabbed Mercer's harness, and hauled him behind a broken shelf of rock that wasn't cover so much as a suggestion. His face was gray. Breath shallow. Pulse there, thin. Wounds ugly, one tearing across the flank, one mangling the thigh. She packed gauze deep, palm pressure, hemostatic powder clouding the air, tourniquet on the leg until his boot twitched. "Stay with me," she said out loud, though the rotor in her ears made her voice sound far away. The net was still trash. Smoke popped somewhere left, the fire slackened then came back harder. She glanced upslope, 3, maybe 4 shooters shifting lanes. The valley's geometry was against them. This wasn't a fight they could win by trading bursts. This was a fight they survived by moving. She checked the clock she kept in her head. The bridge. 90 if lucky, more if the ground argued. Extraction window narrow. Drone somewhere high, useless without comms. She rechecked Mercer's tourniquet, taped a pressure bandage so tight her fingers cramped, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a roof on purpose. She stripped non-essentials from his kit, rolled him with a grunt and a curse, and levered his weight onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry. The first inch told the truth, heavier than training, heavier than memory, heavier than anything with that much blood gone should feel. Her thigh screamed against the tourniquet, a hot wire sawing bone. Her shoulder burned like it had been set with a torch. She found her feet anyway. The world compressed to a series of bad steps. Loose stone. A tilted ledge. A blast of heat from the burning wreck, then the cold of shade where the cliff pressed close. Bullets slapped the rock behind them in frustrated cracks. She didn't look back. Looking back had no oxygen in it. She walked. 10, then 15 staggered strides. Set him down behind a low pile of rubble. Repacked the flank where the bandage bloomed dark. Breathe shallow against the rib pain. Listen for Ryan, short controlled fire, then silence as he bounded to new cover. Good. Still moving. Still a team. She loaded her pistol with hands that wanted to shake and put 2 rounds toward a head that had gotten curious. The head decided life was better and dropped out of sight. Mercer drifted, consciousness dipping in and out like a weak radio. His breath rattled. She pressed her forearm across his chest to anchor him to the earth as she adjusted the carry again. "You're not done," she said. "I need you breathing." It wasn't a plea. It was part of the job list. They cleared the worst of the choke and found a narrow slant of trail that promised a way forward and the possibility of falling 30 feet into a dry ravine. She chose forward. Each foot placement was a tiny contract with gravity. Gravel rolled. Her ankle wobbled, caught, protested. The weight on her back shifted and tried to drag her over the lip. She wedged her fingers into a crack in the wall until the knuckles went numb, then eased the burden back to center and inched on. The ambush thinned behind them, either satisfied or regrouping. Wind picked up and pulled smoke into ribbons that stung her eyes. The sun finally made it over the ridge and turned everything bright and unforgiving. She marked distance by breath counts and the slap of her pulse inside her ears. 30 breaths. Set him down. Repack. 30 more. They reached a low saddle where the valley widened just enough to breathe. Debris littered the flat, old crates, rusted metal, a skeletonized MRAP burned to husk. She slid Mercer down against it and let herself fold beside him for 3 heartbeats, no more. The bleeding at his side slowed under the pressure she refused to ease. She wanted water. She wanted morphine. She wanted the clock to skip. None of that mattered. She checked the sky. The drone circled, indifferent. No birds. No luck. Her radio coughed static and a half-syllable that died before it was born. She spoke anyway, a habit learned in places where words sometimes found ears they weren't supposed to. 2 casualties moving south by west toward fallback. Marking for pickup at bridge. The wind took it. When she tried to lift him again, her leg buckled and fired a flare of pain up her spine. She swallowed the noise that wanted out, shifted tactics, and dragged him by the harness across the dirt, boots pushing backward, shoulders braced like a human winch. It was ugly, but it worked. The ground gave inches. The world narrowed to scrape and pull, packstrap biting into her neck, sweat cutting muddy lines through dust on her face. Somewhere behind, voices floated on the air, sharp, clipped, hunting. She slid Mercer into the shadow of a boulder and drew the pistol again. 3 figures edged a ridge line, casual in that way men get when they think the killing is already done. She waited a half count, found a chest, pressed, watched it drop. The others scattered, tested a flank, tasted a second shot, then chose life over chase. Good choice. She holstered, repacked, relifted. The bridge lived ahead in her head even if the terrain refused to show it yet. A rusted promise out of sight, an exit scratched onto the map and onto her bones. She set her jaw and stood with Mercer across her shoulders, a living, bleeding proof of that promise. Then she took the next step, and the next, and didn't stop, but the trail fought back like it had a grudge. The ledge pinched into a ribbon and then sloughed into loose scree that poured under her boots. Every shift of Mercer's weight sent a hot nail through her shoulder. Her thigh throbbed where the tourniquet bit, a drumbeat of pain that kept lousy time. She counted breaths in blocks of 30 to trick the distance into moving. 30 breaths, set him down, clamp the flank, listen, move again. The wind carried grit that scratched her eyes raw and made the horizon wobble like heat off a blacktop. Mercer stirred once, a thin sound ripped out of him. Maddie, more breath than voice. She tilted, easing him against a knee. I've got you, she said. Save it. Breathe. He slipped under again, dragged by that gray tide that steals men a little at a time. She rechecked the tourniquet on his leg, the knot on the pressure bandage at his side, taped another gauze square tight enough that her fingers went numb. Blood slowed from a steady seep to a stubborn oozing line. Not good, not fatal, yet. Shadows crawled across the valley as the sun climbed, flipping angles, making old cover useless and new cover appear. She learned to read those shifts back in training grounds that smelled like cut grass and chalk dust. Here the lessons felt older, written into the rock: move when the cliff gives you a hand, hide when the sky turns on you. The drone circled high, glassy, and cold. Good eyes. No hands. At a kink in the canyon, the walls opened into a scar of flat ground strewn with the leftovers of other fights, split crates, a torn boot, the ribs of a burned-out truck. She slid Mercer into the truck's shadow and let herself drop to one hip. The world pressed in around the edges, gray fuzz crowding her vision. She squeezed the bridge of her nose until it cleared, then forced water past a throat that didn't want it. 2 sips. No more. She wetted a cloth and touched it to Mercer's mouth. The reflex swallow was weak but there. Voices drifted again, closer this time, stitched with the clipped confidence of men following a blood trail. She palmed the pistol, flattened behind the truck husk, and waited. 3 shapes slid into view on the ridge, weapons easy, scanning lazy because the day was already theirs in their heads. She let them take 2 steps into a bad lane, pressed the trigger twice, then a third for the one who thought he was smarter. Stone spat chips around her as a 4th returned fire from somewhere she hadn't marked yet. She rolled under the axle, fired through the rusted guts, and the 4th voice cut off mid-curse. Silence dropped hard. No time to collect the echo. She holstered and listened. Wind, the tick of cooling metal, Mercer's thin rasp. The net coughed half a word again and died. She spoke anyway, breath low. 2 moving, bridge bound, medical critical. Mark the canal if you're listening. Maybe someone was. Maybe it was only the rock. When she lifted Mercer again, her ankle gave a sharp, tearing protest. She rode it out, knee locked, jaw clenched hard enough to spike pain into her temples, then forced motion back into her legs. Step. Balance. Step. The path cut into a staircase of fractured slabs that demanded both hands, which she didn't have to spare. She improvised, hooked Mercer's harness under her forearm, wedged his hip over her shoulder, leaned into the wall until stone ground the skin through her sleeve. Climb. Don't look down. Looking down is a story you don't have time to tell. Halfway up, the sky dimmed, not clouds, not luck. Smoke. A curl of it rode the wind from somewhere ahead, sweet bitter with burned plastic. She pictured the canal bridge beyond the next bend, pictured it gone, pictured it still standing because she needed it to be. Need isn't strategy, Chris would say, and her memory of his voice made her chest knot. She planted a boot on a narrow lip, pushed, cleared the last step, and found a shelf wide enough to stage another patch job. Mercer's skin was cooler now. The good kind of fear slid up her spine, quiet, precise, focused. She opened a fresh bandage, pressed, felt the slow give of clot versus pulse. If she tightened more she'd steal what perfusion he had left, if she loosened she'd be chasing red again. She chose a middle path and taped it with a strip that tore at her bloody gloves. You owe me beers for this, she said, because talk keeps the dark from widening. The corner of his mouth twitched like some part of him heard. The shelf sloped into a shallow gully dotted with thorn and trash. Old water once ran here, now it was a dry tongue pointed at the bend she'd been chasing for an hour. Her legs had turned to carved wood, no spring, just hinge. She dragged instead of carried, boots finding backward purchase, shoulders hauling until hot needles lanced into her neck. The gully's lip fought her with a lip of broken concrete. She made a ramp out of a crate lid and curses, inched Mercer over, and saw, finally, in the crack between two jutting rocks, the line of the canal and, above it, the rust bite of steel. The bridge wasn't a mirage. It sat there exactly as the map had promised, chipped concrete, rusted rail, a spray of faded paint that used to be an American flag. Relief came so fast it felt like weakness. She braced against it, turned it into motion, and covered the last stretch in a stuttering series of nearfalls. The canal bed below was a boneyard of stones and old tires. The bridge surface baked in the noon glare, hot enough to wrinkle the air. She set Mercer down near the far pylon where a sliver of shade survived, then let herself kneel. Her hands shook, honest and uncontrollable. She let them. Then she pulled the flare from her vest. Her thumb wouldn't work the cap. She used her teeth like an animal, spat plastic, struck the primer. Nothing. Struck again. The flare hissed, coughed, then bloomed a red that looked like salvation painted into smoke. She held it high and waved, feet wide for balance, vision tunneling until all she saw was the column of color climbing into the white heat of sky. Here, she said, to no one and to everyone. Here. The drone tilted, a small acknowledgement that might have been imagination. She set the flare upright against the rail and turned back to Mercer, pressing the bandage at his side with the flat of her palm, counting to 30, then 60, then 90, feeding time into his body like it could be transfused. The world narrowed to sound, the hiss of flare, the hiss of breath, the dull ocean roar of blood inside her ears. She blinked sweat out of her eyes and scanned the ridges because being found first by the wrong people would ruin all of this. The wind changed and carried a faint, almost shy thump from far off. She didn't trust it at first. She'd imagined sounds all morning. But it came again, clearer, rhythmic, rotors somewhere behind the teeth of the hills. Come on, she said, to the sound, to the sky, to the stubborn heartbeat under her palm. The flare spat sparks. The red climbed. The thump grew meat on its bones and turned into the confident chop of a black hawk running hard. She didn't celebrate. She tightened the tourniquet on Mercer's leg a quarter turn, hissed at the flash of pain in her own thigh, and kept her eyes on the approach vector. Help was real, but time was still a knife. The bridge had given them a stage. Now they had to live long enough for the curtain to rise, and the sky finally answered. The Black Hawk slid into view low over the ridge, nose down, rotors biting hot air into a hard fist that slapped dust across the bridge. The flare's red smeared sideways under the wash. Maddie threw an arm over her eyes and kept the other hand pinned on Mercer's bandage, feeling the weak lift of each breath like a moth against glass. The bird flared, skids kissing concrete with a squeal. Crew doors blew open. A medic leaned out, Vanessa, visor up, eyes already counting wounds. Too critical. Maddie shouted, voice shredded by smoke. She pointed to Mercer first. That was the rule. Treat the one who can die the fastest. Vanessa and a crewman hit the ground running with a litter. Maddie helped guide Mercer onto it, hands moving on muscle memory, tubing away from feet, straps tight at chest and legs. The rotor wash tried to lift the litter like a kite, for hands kept it honest. They hustled him into the cabin where red lights washed everything the color of meat. Monitors woke and argued in beeps. Vanessa's voice came clipped and calm, airway, pulse weak and thready, GSW flank and thigh, tourniquet applied, pressure dressing soaked, starting fluids, TXA on board, 2 large bores. Maddie tried to follow but her leg folded. A crew chief grabbed under her arm and felt the warm slick. You're hit. She nodded once, not trusting her mouth. Multiple, she said anyway, because honesty was habit. He goes first. You both go, Vanessa said without looking up. Load her. The crew chief muscled Maddie into the second rack, buckles clicking hard against her armor. The cabin took them in, hot wind, diesel, antiseptic, the metallic rattle that says you're moving and it's going to hurt before it helps. The pilot pulled power. The valley fell away. The bridge shrank to a chalk line. Maddie stared at the ceiling because the ceiling didn't swim. Her chest was tight, not panic, just a clamp where breath should be. She tried to turn her head toward Mercer but the neck brace a crewman had slid under her chin said no. She watched Vanessa's hands instead, steady, quick, a metronome of purpose. Gauze, tape, a chest seal pressed flat, 4 bags hung like small moons, numbers spilling across screens in bright, unforgiving fonts. Pain came in waves that broke strange, delayed, as if the rotors stirred it loose. She tried to count with them and lost the thread. Heat soaked her bones. Cold licked her fingers. Her world narrowed again to the sound of Mercer's monitor, a stubborn little bird of a beep that refused to stop. Then it stopped. It wasn't a dramatic scream, it was a clean line that sliced the air and turned everything else into background. Vanessa's head snapped. He's coding. The word cracked like dry wood. She was already moving, compressions hard and rhythmic, a crewman bagging, another pushing meds through a line that hummed like a silver vein. Charging, clear. The jolt made Mercer's body hop on the litter. The line hiccuped, thought it over, then stuttered back into a wounded rhythm. We have pulse, Vanessa said, breath a little shorter now, eyes never leaving the numbers. Maddie felt something wet slide from her scalp, down her temple. She reached with fingers that were not quite hers and came away red. Not all of it belonged to Mercer. Her shoulder had a fire built in it that wouldn't die. Each bump in the air shook coals loose. She chased a mouthful of air and caught only half. The cabin tilted, then righted. Someone said, 10 minutes out. 10 minutes was a country. 10 minutes was a lifetime. She drifted and snapped back with the sound of Velcro ripping and the snap of a vial, Vanessa saying, BP crashing onto her. There was a movement like a hook under Maddie's sternum tugging down. The ceiling tunneled and dark turned soft at the edges. Hands pressed at her side, a hiss whispered through an oxygen mask that tasted of clean plastic and old battles. Stay with me, Vanessa said, and for a moment the medic inside Maddie hated being the patient with a bright, useless fury. The rotors deepened and the pitch changed, descent. Wind became hands again, slapping the cabin. The world outside went from horizon to blur to a strip of man-made order clawed out of dust. The skids kissed ground and stayed. Doors banged open. Heat punched in. Hands flowed. Litter off. Litter off. Voices sharpened with walls around them instead of sky. Bright lights took over. Ceiling tiles traded places with desert sun. A hallway came in fast fragments, boot squeaks, glass windows, a gowned figure pacing backward while pulling Mercer's litter, calling out vitals to a team already scrubbing. A second team peeled Maddie into a bay that smelled like cold metal and betadine. She tried to turn her head and caught only a ghost of Mercer's profile as he vanished through double doors. "Don't let him," she started, and the sentence slid out of her hand. A face leaned into her field, older, steady eyes, name badge blurred. "Madison, I'm Dr. Harris. You're safe. We've got you." The words were a rope thrown into fast water. She grabbed anyway. "He's alive." It came out like a child's question. "For now," he said, and there was no lie in it. "Focus here." Hands catalogued her damage out loud, GSW's X multiple. Left thigh, tourniquet in place, intact distal skin but cyanotic foot, will save it. Right chest, through and through with partial collapse suspected. Shoulder, likely fracture. Fluids running. Cross-match now. The mask fogged with her breath. The room tilted again and then pinned down to flat. Cold slid into a vein and spread like honesty. Her ribs hurt less and more at the same time. Someone cut her uniform free and long, practice strokes that felt like the end of a chapter. She heard her own heart on a monitor, a separate creature trapped in glass. It stuttered. "Stay with me, Madison," Dr. Harris said, one hand on her sternum as if he could keep the engine from stalling by touch. She wanted to answer with something tough and clever. What came was smaller. "Don't leave him." He gave the kind of nod that promises work, not miracles. "We won't." The edges closed in. Somewhere beyond the curtain, metal clanged and a voice called, "Or one ready." The cloth above her face wavered as they rolled. Lights passed like mile markers on an empty interstate. She counted 3, lost count, started over, because counting meant she was here and not somewhere she couldn't help. She dropped. Then a leash yanked her back, her heart decided to stop being cooperative and the room turned urgent. Hands pressed, a chest rose under a bag, someone barked, "Charge," and electricity folded her in half from the inside. The world flashed white, then settled into a gray where pain felt far away and wrong. She heard Vanessa again, close, as if the helicopter had followed her down the hall. She carried him 2 miles, Vanessa said to no one in particular, or to everyone, a fact set on the table like an instrument. Don't let that be for nothing. Maddie thought of the bridge, rust under her palm, the flare spitting stubborn red, Mercer's weight across her shoulders, too heavy to be possible and exactly as heavy as it had to be. She grabbed that picture and held on because it weighed more than sleep. It held. The line on her monitor found a beat that wasn't pretty but was hers. The room exhaled with her. "Okay," Dr. Harris said, the word flat and grateful. "Move." The doors blew open on bright steel and colder air. Masks lowered. Hands rose. A light like a second sun warmed her face. Someone said, "Knife," and the curtain of pain dropped for a different kind of dark. Somewhere between here and nowhere, she felt a thumb brush the back of her hand, maybe real, maybe memory. Chris's voice, the one that lived in the empty spaces, said what he always said on the edge of a hard thing, "Don't quit just because it hurts." She wanted to tell him she wasn't quitting. She was betting everything on the next breath, for her, for Mercer, for the promise she'd made the valley and the bridge and her own stubborn bones. The dark took her softly this time, not a cliff but a slope. Behind her, the hospital swallowed the noise of war and turned it into beeps, whispers, and work. Ahead of her, the story stayed open, a door held by many hands. And for the first time since the valley woke up shooting, there was room for the smallest, most dangerous thing of all. The thought that they might both make it through hung like a fragile thread over the next hours, and the hospital held it with quiet hands. Time stopped measuring itself in firefights and distance, it started counting by drips, beeps, and the slow return of color to skin. Maddie surfaced by inches, first as weight, then as sound, vent hiss, monitor chatter, shoes whispering across linoleum, a nurse's pen scratching vitals onto a chart. Pain was there, but disciplined, contained by lines and numbers and people who moved like they'd practiced for this moment 1,000 times. She blinked at a ceiling tile and found it wasn't the sky. Light settled into squares. A figure drifted into focus, Vanessa, hair tucked, eyes soft with use. "Hey, Clark," she said, voice pitched low like she might spook something. "Welcome back." Maddie tried to answer and got air that felt like a key turned in a stiff lock. Her chest hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that announces you're still in the game. "Mercer," she rasped. It came out dry as paper. Vanessa's smile made a room by itself. "Holding. Surgery was ugly but fair. He's next door. He'll want to argue with someone soon enough." A doctor Maddie recognized only by steadiness, Harris, checked her pupils and her chart. "You did good work in the field," he said simply, like paying a bill. "We matched you 4 units. Lungs reinflated. Leg is a project but a solvable one. Shoulders cracked, not shattered. You're allowed to be stubborn later. Right now you're allowed to rest." He paused, a beat she was sure he used on purpose. "And yes, he's alive." The word slotted into place behind her ribs like a bone set right. She closed her eyes because open was too much and because closed was finally safe. Sleep didn't drop her, it drifted her to a bank. When she woke again it was to sunlight throwing a thin gold across the edge of a cabinet and the silhouette of Vaughn in the doorway, uniform crisp, voice lowered out of respect for machines. "Clark," he said, nearer now. "You moved a mountain the old-fashioned way. On your shoulders." She might have laughed if laughing didn't cost. "Felt like the mountain moved me," she said. He nodded once. "Medics are always the last ones to take credit. Doesn't matter. Everyone else already did. Drone footage confirms the trek. Medevac report reads like a legend. I've put in for the Distinguished Service Cross. It won't bring back the hours it took, but it will make sure the story doesn't get told wrong." Her eyes burned for reasons that weren't just body chemistry. She thought of Chris, dust in his hair, grin too big for bad days, saying pain was just proof you had more to give. She thought of Thomas on a porch in Colorado Springs, hands like maps. Vaughn's voice shook her loose from it. "Mercer's recommended for a Silver Star. He earned it. You both did." She didn't say awards are for the living. She didn't say some days that felt like guilt. She said, "Thank you," because the work had been noticed and because notice meant other medics might get what they needed next time. They moved her to a quieter room, all glass and soft alarms. Through a window across the hall she could see a shape that was Mercer, tethered by tubes and wires, chest rising slow and stubborn. Nurses flowed in patterns that made time feel sane. Days unspooled. Pain stepped down a ladder. She sat upright for the first time and the world tilted, then settled. She learned to breathe around ribs and let her heart beat without supervision. She watched clouds drift past a square of sky and didn't picture ridgelines for a whole minute, then 2. By noon on the 3rd day, a corpseman stuck his head in with a grin he tried to hide. "He's awake," he said. It didn't echo, it landed. They eased Maddie into a chair with a brace that made her feel like a fragile version of her own spine and rolled her across the hall. The door slid and the air changed, a little cooler, a little cleaner, a little filled with the kind of luck you don't spend all at once. Mercer's face was the color of someone halfway back, pale but not ghosted. Lines ran to his arms. Gauze banded his chest. His eyes were open, blue pared down to essence. They found her, and the corner of his mouth lifted in something like a smile that had to fight its way through a lot of history to get there. "You look terrible," he croaked. It was the best thing he could have said. "You're heavier than you look," she answered. They let the quiet fill in the rest, a quiet that didn't have to be defended. I remember pieces, he said after a while, voice gaining texture. Heat. Your voice. Red smoke. Thought it was a dream. Real enough to bleed on, she said. He blinked slow, then fixed her with a look that belonged to the man who briefed teams at 0400. You didn't leave me. It wasn't a question. Wasn't on the table, she said. Rules say survive. Some rules outrank others. He breathed in like the world had weighed again. You carried me 2 miles, he said, almost to himself. I carried you because you were mine to carry, she said, and left it there, because dressing it up would make it less true. Dr. Harris interrupted only to be the adult in the room. 2 more minutes, he said, and neither argued because they were both new at listening. When Harris left, the silence had edges. Mercer touched the rail of his bed like he was checking it hadn't moved. When they pin that metal on you, he said, pretend to like the cameras. You pretending too? I'll lean on a cane and scowl. It'll read as character. Night shifted the hospital into its other self, quieter, a little more haunted, staffed by people who know the difference between fear and bad lighting. Maddie lay awake and watched the shadow of a monitor arm crawl across the wall as the hours rolled. She got used to the shape of her shoulder's ache and the stubborn itch at the edge of the bandage on her thigh. She mapped the hallway by footsteps and learned which nurse carried a pen that clicked too much. Ordinary crept back in and brought its own mercy. Beacon Hill Inn came up in a discharge plan someone left on a clipboard, rest before formalities in Boston. Luke Air Force Base was stamped on her transfer sheet like a promise of air between buildings. Denver felt a lifetime away and also like a front porch they'd step back onto pretending nothing had changed while knowing everything had. Ryan stopped by with a grin that tried to hide relief. He didn't stay long. He said, good work, like a man who'd been the catcher in the last inning and watched the ball stick. A week in, Vaughn returned with papers and a look that mixed command with human. President will read both your names tomorrow morning, he said. Media will hear later. You'll get visitors. Half of them will want you to say it was easy, none of them will say it that way. Tell the truth but not the gore. Keep the part that belongs to you. Maddie nodded. She had already begun a private inventory of what to keep and what to let the wind have. When they wheeled her back across the hall that evening, Mercer was sitting up a little higher, a tiny rebellion measured in degrees. They didn't talk about fear because naming it would give it a chair. They talked about coffee they weren't allowed yet and boots they'd have to replace and the unreasonable way time slows in hospitals. He asked about Thomas and she promised to call him as soon as someone found her a phone that didn't require a password known only to the gods. He told her Vanessa had cursed the sky for 3 solid minutes when his line blew en route and that somehow made her like Vanessa even more. Before lights out, a chaplain walked by and didn't stop because no one had asked. Maddie watched his shadow pass and thought of the bridge, the iron taste of heat, the flare bleeding red into rotor wash, the way her hand had pressed life into Mercer's side as if she could insist it stay. The picture didn't hurt like it had. It sat where it belonged, a past thing that would always be present, a scar you could run a finger over without reopening. She slept like people sleep when the body finally believes the watch is over. In the morning she woke to the smell of real coffee smuggled by a nurse with good priorities and to a text on a borrowed phone that said, award approved, DSC pending ceremony in Boston. Her throat closed for a second. Not for the ribbon. For the affirmation that the hard part had a name someone else could say. She wheeled herself to Mercer's doorway and didn't cross it because some thresholds deserve respect. He was awake, eyes clear, mouth already tilting into the kind of comment that keeps men alive. She beat him to it. We made it, she said, not proud, not surprised, just stating the math. He held her gaze for a long beat and nodded, once, the exact same step of agreement he'd given her in a valley that had tried to erase them. Outside, a helicopter passed over, just a hum this time, not a rescue. Inside, the machines kept time, and the day began like a quiet handshake with the future, and from there the future kept showing up in small, manageable pieces. Morning rounds. Paperwork that insisted on full names and middle initials. A phone call to Thomas where silence did the heavy lifting between simple words. Ryan's quick visit with a lopsided grin and an update about gear turned into evidence, 2 helmets with scars that matched the story. Vanessa stopped by on her way to the helipad, gave a 2-finger salute that said more than any speech, and disappeared back into the business of catching people who were falling. Transfers happened in stages. Luke Air Force Base first, a hop that felt calmer because sky without gunfire is just sky. The aircraft smelled the same as it always does, oil, heated plastic, a hint of old dust, but the tone was different. Not a sprint. A ride. Paperbacks appeared. Someone passed mints. Nurses traded dark jokes in the back where patients couldn't hear, except Maddie could and didn't mind because it meant the world was working again. Boston took them in with clean edges and a wind that cut through heavy coats. Beacon Hill had stairs she wasn't ready for, so they found a room that didn't require a fight, and the woman at the desk slid keys across polished wood with a kindness that made conversation easy. Maddie slept with the window cracked and the city's hum running like a low river under everything. Mercer moved carefully, counting progress in inches, letting pride sit in the chair while he learned to lean without making it a confession. The day of the ceremony came with a sky so clear it almost looked staged. Logan had the flags in the right places, the marching band tuned to invisible lines, the press cordon behind rails that clicked with camera shutters practicing on the breeze. Vaughn found them before the formation and said the same thing to both in different words: stand where I tell you, breathe, look up sometimes so someone can get the photo your grandkids will find in a drawer. They pinned Mercer first. Silver Star. The citation read in that parade voice that scrapes names into stone. He accepted without speech, because some men are built that way, a nod at the right time and a look at Maddie that carried the paragraph he didn't say. Then her turn. Distinguished Service Cross. The ribbon felt lighter than it should have, the metal cooler. The words rolled out over a courtyard full of uniforms and civilians who held breaths in the same rhythm. For extraordinary heroism, for saving the life of a fellow warrior at great personal risk, for demonstrating courage beyond expected limits. She stood straight, not stiff. The medal settled against the dress blues that never quite felt like hers but fit enough today. Applause is a strange sound when it belongs to you. It arrives from a distance and lands at your feet. She didn't bow. She didn't shrink. She let it be for both of them and for the crew that flew and the hands that pressed and taped and pushed meds when numbers went feral. After, they shook hands until palms went numb. Reporters asked careful questions with careless edges. She used short answers that told the truth and protected what needed to stay theirs. No, I didn't think about dying. Yes, I thought about the bridge. Yes, he was heavy. No, I didn't carry him alone. They found a bench near the chapel once the crowd dissolved into duty and traffic. The parade field stretched out clean and quiet. Mercer sat with his cane angled just so, metal glinting like a stubborn star that refused to learn modesty. You ready to go home? He asked without turning. Define home, she said. A porch in Colorado. Coffee that tastes like the morning. Shoes that aren't boots. She let that picture stand. Yeah, she said. I could use all of that. They didn't plan the rest out loud. Plans would come. A podcast reached out. A school in Dorchester wanted someone to talk about grit without turning it into a cartoon. Vaughn asked if she'd consider a training slot where medics learn to hold a person's life in both hands and call it Tuesday. She said maybe to everything and yes to nothing right then, because saying yes too early can be a way of running. Denver was waiting like a saved page. Thomas met her at the curb with the simple relief of a man who had learned to pray in his own language and was fine not being seen doing it. He hugged her carefully and then not carefully at all. The house smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. A box on the table held letters from people she'd never met. Some were from parents. One was from a kid who wrote in blocky pencil that he wanted to join up and help on purpose. She answered that one first with a line that said help takes many forms and the uniform is one of them, not all. Days rebuilt themselves from ordinary parts. Physical therapy started, a stubborn negotiation between muscle and memory. The leg learned to be leg again. The shoulder remembered range. The lungs stopped complaining about deep breaths. Mercer sent texts with photos of a gym that looked like a garage and a schedule that looked like recovery. Ryan mailed a patched cloth from the flares rail someone found on a follow-up walk, the red still visible in streaks. Vanessa sent nothing but a single message: you'll hate public speaking until you don't. Then you'll use it right. Boston called again with a recording request. She asked for time. Not because the story wasn't ready, because she wanted to decide which pieces belonged to the world and which belonged forever to the space on that bridge where the red smoke feathered into rotor wash and a life kept insisting on itself. She picked her lines with the care she used when placing pads and tape in a helicopter that refused to fly smooth. When the microphone finally waited, she kept it simple. "We didn't quit," she said. "That's the headline. Everything else is details and other people's work. Night in Colorado has a clean dark that cities can't find." She sat on the porch more than once with Thomas and let that dark do its job. No speeches. Just air that didn't hurt to breathe and quiet steps in the yard that belonged to a neighbor's cat. The metal stayed in its box on a shelf. She knew where it was. She didn't need it to prove anything when she reached for a glass of water or a door handle or her phone to check on Mercer and send a photo of a sky that wasn't trying to kill anyone. Months slid forward. Scars turned from conversation starters to facts. The bench in Boston existed in memory the way the shelf of rock existed in the valley, places where people sat inside moments that could have gone another way and didn't. When she spoke to young medics, she kept the language plain. Pack your bag the same way every time. Count twice. Learn to move under weight. Learn to breathe when someone else can't. There's no magic. There's training, decisions, and the promise you make to your team before anything starts. If there was a lesson she let the world hold, it was small and stubborn. Not a slogan. A habit. Don't leave people behind. Not because it looks good on a plaque, but because it's the kind of rule that ties a day together when everything else comes apart. She'd proved it once on a bridge that won't make it into any travel guides. She'd prove it again in quieter ways, hand on a shoulder in a clinic, a call returned, a class taught where someone's hands shake the first time they hold a tourniquet and stop shaking by the third. Inside, the machines that once kept time for her became clocks in rooms she could walk past without flinching. Outside, a helicopter sometimes crossed the Colorado sky and was just a helicopter, carrying someone else's story toward hands that were ready. Maddie let the sound pass, steady and unremarkable, and felt the future tighten its grip on the present in a way that felt right. She wasn't done. Neither was he. And the promise they'd tested under heat and dust kept its shape, quiet, stubborn, built to last.